Company man woke me up. Said you'd need ferry to the Obra Dinn. Not many eager for that job. Seems a bit late if you ask.
I didn't.
Have you ever wondered what makes this game great? What makes it rise from the crowd? What makes me want to get back to it? Well, I definitely asked myself these questions, and more often than not, I even went a little bit further. Are the games that I like good because they speak to me, or are they good in a vacuum, regardless of my personal taste? Let's start by breaking down the 4 fundamental elements of a great video game, as I see them. The first key element would be gameplay, how it functions, how you interact with it, what it expects you to do, and how it reacts to your actions. Without a clearly defined gameplay mechanic, it couldn't be a game. The second key element is engagement. The game needs to provide challenges and rewards to match. The only way to avoid the game becoming repetitive in this action-reward cycle is to carve a path of progression, allowing the players to face harder and more varied challenges just as they become better and better at it, and thus feel themselves get powerful and invested into the game. This balance is not trivial to achieve and sustain at all. The third element is the story. There are definitely good games that lack any form of story, but even for the best of the bunch, good is all that they can ever reach. Games without a story are like junk food. They can feel good and satisfy your hunger, but one day later they disappear into the mist of time, never to be remembered. You need a compelling narrative to elevate a good game to a great game. A great story can teach, entertain, engage, and challenge at the same time. My fourth and final element is graphics. And I don't mean in the sense that a photorealistic looking game must be better than an old-timey looking one. My generation was obsessed with graphics quality because we were experiencing rapid progress in the field. But we're long past that. Computer graphics went beyond the point of good enough quite a while ago. We're in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse era. Graphics no longer need to get better with every generation or be the best it can be. It just needs to be a good match for the game. Bonus points for a choice of graphic style that elevates any one or more of the other 3 game fundamentals. And that's it, the 4 basic elements of the game. And it's not by mistake that I only call the first 2 key elements. Those 2 are enough, if they are great, to make for a good game. But if you want to strive for greatness, you really need to go for all 4. And if you do a great job on all 4, then you unlock quad damage. Now this. This is Lucas Pope. He is an American video game designer, an indie developer that released the 2 games I'm going to put head to head and examine here. Why? Because one of them I absolutely love, while I struggle to even go above like with the other. I hope to uncover the reason why, and maybe find some metric that provides proof that it's not only me, that there is a palpable difference between these 2 games that is felt by a larger audience but me. You don't need to know anything about Lucas Pope apart from the fact that he was more of a functional programmer. His years in the mainstream gaming industry were spent coding tools and games GUIs rather than games themselves. So, he has a strong eye for functionality, ease of use, and user experience that I think shows in the games he released as an indie dev. The second notable thing is that he really likes to work within severe graphical constraints. His games are either a reduced palette or even 1-bit graphics, and this seems to be a stylistical choice rather than an indie developer's crutch to have a simple graphics for faster turnaround. In 2010, Lucas Pope turned independent, and in 2013 he released the first game from today's match. Paper Please is a puzzle simulation video game where the player inhabits the life of an immigration inspector living in the border town of East Grestin between the fictional countries of Arstotzka and Kolechia at the tail end of a 6-year war between the two. The tensions at the border are still high and will escalate during the month in which the game takes place. Direct references to existing political ideologies are avoided, but the fictional ones used instead bear a striking resemblance to Eastern Bloc type communism. Furthermore, the setting of a town split in two by a border between two adversarial countries seems a direct reference to East and West Berlin during its war's existence. Each day the inspector walks to his booth at the border wall, where he needs to inspect the entrance paperwork before allowing or denying them entrance to Arstotzka, or even detaining them in later stages of the game. The validity of these documents and possible discrepancies between them or them and reality needs to be ascertained, and suitable action taken under threat of receiving citations for any processing error, complete with increasing financial penalties. Each day will also mark new changes in the rules that condition lawful entrance in the country, or new technology that needs to be properly used becomes available, so a difficulty curve is applied. At the end of each day, the inspector travels home to a mini-game of managing expenses for his extended family living together in the same state-owned apartment. This is where the game's true difficulty lies. Unless the easy mode crutch is enabled, this mini-game is surprisingly punishing, and the inspector will perpetually teeter on the edge of running out of money. And in the absence of funds, heat or food cannot be paid for, and family members have a very low appetite for hunger or sickness. Losing a family member or running into debt will trigger an untimely game over type end. There are only 31 playable days in the game, starting with November 23, 1982. Before the 32nd day is reached, one of the two possible ends will be met, depending on the inspector's decisions during this period. Each day, the first 9 entrants and their order of entering the booth are heavily scripted, with only an average of about 50% of them being randomly generated. Starting with the 10th entrant of the day, the rest are completely random. The days when the checkpoint is attacked by terrorists are exceptions that end abruptly, most of the time before even reaching those 9 entrants. So a minimal daily proficiency level for any player is to pass at least 9 entrants when possible to properly cover the story encounters, and after that go for as many as possible for the higher salary. 10 validly processed entrants is a threshold where the inspector's salary breaks even with the expenses, during the early days at least. The financial get worse as the game progresses. Return of the Obra Dinn is a puzzle-adventure first-person video game released in 2018, 5 years after Papers, Please. In it, the player inhabits, wait for it, an insurance chief inspector tasked with investigating the ghost ship Obra Dinn, a merchant ship missing for 5 years that suddenly reappeared off the coast of England. Its voyage and the fates of the 60-strong crew and passengers missing and presumed dead are to be determined by the player. The action starts as the player gets ferried onto the ship armed with only 2 things. The first is a logbook that starts mostly empty, apart from information about how the game is to be played, maps of the ship's decks, a crew manifest, and several drawings illustrating the crew members. The second tool can only be described as a magical pocket watch called Memento Mortem, remember the death. As the player explores the boat and gets near to the remains of one of the crew, either physical or as an after-image, see later, the pocket watch readies itself to be activated. This transports the inspector into a time bubble in the past, where the last lines of dialogue and environmental sounds before that person's demise can be heard. Once that's done, the player can actually navigate around the fateful moment, completely frozen in time. Doing this will achieve 2 things. First, it allows observing the scene of the crime from any angle, seeing at the very least how exactly that person perished and who are the faces, if not yet the identities, of the perpetrator and of potential witnesses, but also what was happening at the time on a different deck of the ship or in an adjacent room. Second, it will reveal on predetermined blank pages from the logbook basic information about the event, minus the identity of the victim, the reason for its demise, and the identity of the offender responsible, if there is one. These 3 pieces of information are to be determined by the inspector, using inference on any piece of information that gets revealed during these travels into the past. After a while in the bubble, the pocket watch will start to shake, and upon interacting with it, it will then point out the location of another existing body in the same scene. Using the watch close to that body will transport the player back into the present, where fairy dust will accompany them towards the after-image of that crime location in the present world. Using the watch on that after-image will then transport the inspector even further back to that particular crime, frozen in time. This cycle repeats until there are no more deaths in that scene, and a door allowing transport back to present reality will just appear in the bubble. These chained events appear in the logbook as distinct parts in a single chapter from the ship's adventure. Most of the time, finishing a whole chapter or experiencing select bubbles for the first time will also magically unlock access to the next area of interest that was previously closed off, where a different chapter of the story can be usually started. Because of this specific game mechanic of jumping from one person's moment of demise to another that already exists on the scene, these events or parts of chapters can initially be experienced only in reverse order from a time perspective, and that can add to the confusion. But if the player keeps at it, eventually a point will be reached when it will start to rain and the boatman waiting by the side of the ship announces that a storm is approaching and the inspector should hurry up and finish the investigation. But there are absolutely no time constraints in this game. The player can take as much time as they want. That moment simply marks the point where all the logbook pages have been revealed and can be inspected freely. No more traveling back in time is required, but going back and reviewing any part of any chapter, in whatever order, mostly, remains an option. The second stage of the game starts at this point, when it's mostly about going back and forth between the logbook pages and trying to piece together information that will hint or directly point at the identities of the victims and of the offenders from every page in the book. The mechanism of injury for every victim should by now be already determined because it's the only thing immediately apparent even when going back in the past for the first time. Correctly determined fates will be confirmed by the game, but only 3 at a time, to negate the possibility of brute forcing fates in a reasonable fashion. Only 58 of the 60 fates can be deduced from the information existing at the scene. The last 2 can only be solved as part of the best ending. That ending happens only if the inspector leaves Obra Dinn having all 58 solvable fates correctly determined and locked in the logbook. So, these are the challengers. On one hand, we have an older game that was built during a few months in OpenFL. On the other hand, we have a 3D game built over 5 years with quite a large time investment in narrative, voice acting, Foley, and Unity engine modification to allow for the cohesive merriment of a 3D world and dithering algorithms to produce the intended 1-bit aesthetic. From the technical perspective alone, Return of the Obra Dinn is fascinating because 3D engines and dithering don't go well together out of the box. But most of the players will be completely unaware of the technical difficulties this game managed to solve quite elegantly. So, how is it that I immediately fell in love with Papers, Please, while I keep trying year after year to fancy Return of the Obra Dinn, only to fail every time? Am I truly alone in this? I tried diving into some metrics, and the first results coming in aren't promising. For starters, the Metacritic score is better for Return of the Obra Dinn on both critic and user reviews. 85 versus 89 isn't much, but it's not pointing in the direction I would have hoped. But I believe the later game was advantaged by the doors opened by the success of Papers, Please. The only blemish in its dominance is the fact that Return of the Obra Dinn has a higher percentage of negative user reviews. To get a higher overall score in this situation means users were also more polarized in their reviews. Papers, Please was nominated in 19 categories at Games Awards and won 9 of them, an impressive 47%. Return of the Obra Dinn was nominated in 26 categories and won just 7 awards, a measly 27%. If you can call winning a quarter of your nominations measly. This looks like the smoking gun I'm looking for, but I don't think it is. I also believe because the later game launched on top of an established positive perception of Lucas Pope as an indie developer, maybe its reception was a bit too enthusiastic and the game was pushed ahead in far more categories than it should have been and had a realistic chance to win. But I believe the key that unlocks the answers for my questions is to focus on user behavior and not rely on critics or awards. If I pop on SteamDB, I immediately met my first small win. Here, from double the amount of reviews, Papers, Please is favored by a slim margin, 95 versus 94, excluding change. And this double off in favor of Papers, Please repeats across the board. At any point, there seem to be 2 times more players active in game. The 24-hour peak is also about double, and the all-time peak is comfortably 3 times stronger in favor of the older, simpler game. And overlaying these graphs one on top of the other and constraining it to encompass only the period of Return of the Obra Dinn existence truly paints the magnitude of Papers, Please dominance. And finally, we arrived at the estimates of the units sold. It's impossible to know for sure how many units of each were ever sold unless Lucas Pope tells us about it. But I believe whatever inaccuracies these estimates carry is consistent across each platform. So, looking at these numbers, whatever estimates you may fancy, it seems that Papers, Please sales dwarfs Return of the Obra Dinn by a ratio of 4:1 at least. Both titles still sell well according to estimates, but even as the latter is newer, and maybe it could be argued it has a longer life ahead of it, its weekly estimates are also about 3-4 times weaker than those of Papers, Please. So there is no realistic scenario in which it will ever catch up. Now I would be remiss not to mention the fact that Return of the Obra Dinn is also 2 times more expensive than Papers, Please. But I really believe this matters less when the PC games market is continuously bombarded with sales events and perpetual incentives to buy out your wishlist for cheap. So what happened? Well, I could be cheeky and say Lucas Pope sold us the exact same concept twice. As I hinted before, both games put you in the role of an inspector doing the job of parsing documents, either checking for inconsistencies or similitudes, building a case that will hopefully inform a correct series of decisions by the end of the day or the game. But it's worse than that. If you boil it down, Return of the Obra Dinn is actually only what happens in Papers, Please from the moment an entrant gets into the booth and up to the point the player determines if their documents are in order or not. That and nothing more. No decisions, no branching. Everything else, the boat, the retro graphics, the time travel, the fairy dust, is just dressing on top of an otherwise very basic concept of processing documents. But wait, it goes even deeper still. Every person whose fate you get to determine has already met their fate. They are all dead or missing, and whatever happened, happened. Your choices have no weight to them. Your actions have no consequence, apart from determining your success at solving the bigger puzzle and beating the game. You don't get to decide if you let the couple fleeing from tyranny reunite even though the wife hasn't the necessary papers to cross the border. You don't get to spot and detain the athlete's murderer. You don't get to play spy or completely ignore the ASIC shadow operatives. You don't get to grab a weapon and protect young guard Sergio, allowing him and his girlfriend to meet again and depart into the sunset. You don't get to choose if you help the vengeful father find and enact revenge on his little daughter's killer. There are no time constraints. You as a player cannot be hurt. You cannot lose control of your expenses and lose a family member. You don't need to balance every day your sense of morality and justice with the reality of needing to put food in front of your family. You don't get immersed and emotionally invested in the game. Your empathy cannot be distressed, because it isn't engaged at any point. That's my problem with Return to the Obra Dinn. I'm not a big lover of jigsaw puzzles or sailboats, and failing that, the game doesn't produce any mechanism to keep me engaged and keep me playing. It relies almost exclusively on what I bring to the game. I need to be a lover of puzzles. I need to be curious enough about discovering the whole story, even after I already have a pretty good outline of what happened at the midway point. I need to keep myself engaged. That's Return of the Obra Dinn's cardinal sin. It completely fails to deliver on the second key element of great gaming: engagement. Where Papers, Please is incredibly strong, Return of the Obra Dinn is weak. That's why Papers, Please is and will forever be the better game. It's a masterclass of what can be achieved with minimalistic graphics, basic repetitive sounds, and a couple of checkboxes at the end of every day. Glory to Toska.